Thank you so much for welcoming me. It's really lovely to be here, and especially from the comfort of my own home, which is a bit of a joy, isn't it? I'm presenting today on the first part of my doctoral research, which is about facilitating skin-to-skin contact through baby wearing. So to tell you a little bit about the research field, because it's a funny old place. There's a really well-established research field on ongoing skin-to-skin contact, and that's particularly relevant for our small and premature babies. The term widely used is kangaroo mother care, coined in Colombia around the 80s, which was an intervention when there weren't so many incubators, and babies were maintained mainly against their mother's chests with lots of breastfeeding and early discharge from hospital. And over the past 30 years or so has shown a significant decrease in the neonatal rates of morbidity and mortality. So it's been a fantastic intervention for our small or sick babies. And there's another research field that sits alongside it, which is skin-to-skin contact for healthy babies, particularly focusing on that first hour after birth. The golden hour we talk about in clinical practice, or skin to skin until the end of that first feed. And again, the research is reasonably well established. We've got significant effects for stabilizing the vital parameters of these healthy babies, for instigating breastfeeding, and for the woman's experience. But next to those two, there's another much smaller research field on baby wearing. And I must say, I'm not a baby wearing expert. This was something really new to me. And by baby wearing, I just mean containing the baby against the parent's body, sometimes on the front and sometimes on the back, using a garment or a device. And this study kind of sits smack bang in the middle of all those fields. I'm really interested in ongoing skin-to-skin contact for our healthy babies, and looking at the mother's chest fundamentally as the place that babies live, as their evolutionary habitat. And that was the idea behind this project, to bring something as simple as baby wearing together with skin-to-skin contact, and look at how we can make the maternal chest the easiest place to contain and care for a baby. And here is the garment. This is called the Snoopy garment, modelled here by Kate and her little one. And we talk about it as an anti-intervention. And the reason for that is because it does have some special properties, but actually it's really, really low tech. The idea behind the garment is it's worn by women much like a vest top. It's worn against their skin, like an undergarment. It's got straps which meet between the shoulder blades at the back and come round to the front. They can be detached or untied, so it can be easily adjusted. The panels down the side are ruched and elasticated to keep a close fit to the body. But fundamentally, what's important about it, I'll tilt my camera so you can see, is it's got a U-shaped pouch over the front of the woman's body. And that's reinforced so that when the baby, just wearing a nappy, is included in the top with its mum, it's contained in between the maternal breasts. And although you can see this little baby, they can do a root and a move towards the breast, but otherwise, if they're settled, they stay there quite happily. And the reason that we're terming it an anti-intervention is it is avoiding lots of those small abnormalities that can crop up in those early days, such as cold babies or unsettled babies or babies that are reluctant to feed. And those were the ideas behind the garment. It's probably worth me saying at this point that I don't have any conflicts of interest to declare. I don't have any financial ties to the garment. I applied to do the research study, so I'm taking the perspective of the researcher. So to tell you a little bit about the wider research design of the Snoopy garment, after the Snoopy was developed, the first stage of the research was a pilot study, which is what I'm focusing on today. And as part of the pilot study, I recruited 11 mothers and their babies in the postnatal period to take part and have a go. I went to their houses and used some direct observation to see it in practice. And essentially, the first stage of trialling was under direct supervision to make sure that the garment was safe for babies and to get some ideas of whether it was acceptable to women and whether there was anything that we needed to be aware of before a larger trial. Following the pilot study, I conducted a small randomised controlled trial. I recruited 98 mothers and their babies. I'll tell you a little bit about the design of that later, but that was looking at neonatal thermoregulation and effects on breastfeeding. And then following that, there was a qualitative aspect to the study in which 44 of the women took part in interviews to explore their experiences of parenting and bonding and infant feeding, particularly with reference to skin contact and baby wearing. So the design of the pilot study. Once women offered their informed consent, they were provided with some documentation. And kind of the key tenets behind the design of the pilot study were that it was dyad-led. So the mums and babies could take as much ownership over the data collection and to some degree the analysis as possible. So they were provided with the study forms, a snoopy garment, auxiliary thermometer, and the mother then takes and records her baby's temperature and analyses its behaviour in one of 4 categories. Was the baby settled, unsettled, hungry or asleep? I think they're the 4 baby behavioural states in my books. The mum and baby then take part in Snoopy facilitated skin-to-skin contact. It was up to them when they wanted to finish the skin-to-skin contact, but if they were still doing it after 30 minutes, the mum took a second neonatal temperature. And then once skin-to-skin contact was discontinued, would have a conversation together just to collect some kind of preliminary data on the mum's experiences and how she thought the baby had found it. And whilst the mum and baby were having their skin-to-skin contact, as the researcher, I made some field notes on the design, the fit, the size and the usage of the garment, just to identify any issues and check that neonatal positioning and airways were safe and identify any concerns. So the research questions that this was aiming to respond to is, was the Snoopy going to be safe for unsupervised use at home? The idea behind the garment wasn't that it was always under health professional supervision. It would be that women could use it freely with their babies in the postnatal period at home. So this initial trial sought to find out whether that would be safe to do so. We wanted to know whether the Snoopy was acceptable to women and their babies. And we were really proud to recruit a representative sample of women, both for the pilot and the randomised controlled trial, to seek feedback from, and representative of our clientele in West Birmingham and Sandwell. And the third question was looking at how women and their babies respond to skin contact. And I didn't have many ideas about this, so most of this was kind of things that emerged through watching them, which was really interesting. So to show you some of the data, this is our neonatal data. You can see down the left-hand side, we've got those 11 babies, a whole mixture of feeding practices, breastfeeding, mixed feeding, and formula feeding. Before the skin-to-skin contact, all the babies had a normal neonatal temperature. And there was some thoughts, I suppose, in the development of it about the babies maintaining a safe temperature in skin-to-skin contact, but kind of with the double reinforcement of the panel. We cautiously wondered whether it would maintain temperature or whether we might see a rise in babies' temperatures. But we were pleased to see that it maintained safe neonatal temperatures for all of the babies. And on average, the temperature difference was nothing. So good for neonatal thermoregulation. In terms of the baby's behaviour before skin-to-skin contact, 6 of the mums said their babies were hungry. They recognised feeding cues. And during skin-to-skin contact, a further 2 babies showed feeding cues. So 8 hungry babies, 7 of them spontaneously fed whilst in the garment. It was really important not to offer any instruction to the women about how or whether to feed their babies in the garment. I'm certainly not an expert on that. It's a new design. And it was really fascinating to see these 7 breastfeeding women navigate something totally new. Lots of those women used laid back or biological nurturing positions instinctively, which worked really well. Occasionally a woman would adopt like a more formal position like cross cradle, which worked for them. And one of the women decided to take her baby out of the garment, give it a bottle and then return to skin, and that worked for her too. And interestingly, for the baby's behaviour after the period of skin-to-skin contact, all of the mums reported their baby's behaviour as settled or asleep. And I think from the maternal perspective, that was probably the most important outcome, was how was my baby and did they enjoy it? So an unexpected finding that came through from the field notes was watching the mothers and babies interact. And we know as midwives and student midwives the power of skin-to-skin contact within that first hour. We're used to seeing that eye gazing, the gentle nurturing touch, the questioning and the infant directed speech. And it was really fascinating to see that re-emerge on this episode of skin-to-skin contact that was taking place well into the postnatal period. And you could kind of sense that oxytocin glow of talking to their baby and responding to their baby. And some of the most common things that women did was kind of slip down in their chair and centered their baby so they could have that reciprocal gazing and use that nurturing touch. So it was really beautiful to watch. And we saw that in all of the mother-infant dyads, not just those breastfeeding or mixed feeding, but our formula feeding women too. In terms of the maternal experience, the three most commonly used descriptors were safe, secure and comfortable. It was quite interesting to get a perspective from two of the women that had been using like a vest top or a pajama top, which just repurposed with their baby tucked down the front, the skin-to-skin contact before, which was fantastic. And they were able to give some kind of comparison in terms of the security of the baby's position between their breasts. And that's where they felt the benefit lay, having the containment of the pouch holding the baby's position. And in terms of the design and acceptability, women told us that it was really important to them that they perceived the garment to be gender neutral in terms of their baby's gender. And also that they were able to layer it with overgarments, whether that was a cardigan or a dressing gown or a headscarf. A few really short quotes from some of the women that took part. And what I think is really telling is about women talking about their baby's experiences rather than their own experiences, and kind of rediscovering this concept of kangaroo mother care, which they hadn't heard of before, but suddenly had this realization that, gosh, I do feel like a kangaroo. And they all felt that their baby had enjoyed the experience, which was the most important thing. So to summarise the findings of the pilot study, we found that it maintained neonatal thermoregulation within normal parameters. It encouraged the women and their babies to respond to each other, and drawing on what Jo Hindley was talking about in her talk earlier about that reciprocity and the containment. You could quite literally see, the physical containment, but that establishing that reciprocal communication between the mums and the babies. It allowed women to respond to their baby's feeding cues. One of the mothers, before she trialled the garment, actually was nervous that if she put a hungry baby contained in skin-to-skin contact, that actually it might repress those feeding cues, and she used the term oversettle. She didn't find that it did that, but that was a concern that she shared with us, and actually she felt able to respond to her baby's feeding cues whilst contained in this skin-to-skin contact garment. And it was enjoyed by women and their babies. So based on these preliminary findings, we manufactured the garments ready for the randomised controlled trial. Women were randomised either to the control group, which was to receive standard neonatal and postnatal care, or to the intervention group, which was to receive standard care with the provision of a garment, to wear as much or as little as they wanted to for those first 6 postnatal weeks. And as part of the analysis for the RCT, we looked at the frequency and duration of skin-to-skin contact between the groups, the incidence of abnormal neonatal temperatures, and infant feeding practices at 6 weeks postnatal in terms of breastfeeding continuation and exclusivity. And finally, in the qualitative follow-up, we explored those women's experiences of bonding, parenting, and infant feeding decision-making with reference to skin-to-skin contact. Unfortunately, I can't share the results of the RCT with you today, but they will be published soon. And if you're interested in following the work of the Snoopy project, and baby wearing and skin to skin, then please follow me on Twitter for updates, and it'll be great to connect. You can get me on my work email as well. So thank you so much for tuning in.
Okay. Ooh. Thank you, Roisin. That was really interesting. And I just was, I mean, you've tempted us now with talk of the RCT results not allowed to come out yet, but I understand because obviously you need to be published first. So for those of you audience, we'll have to get Roisin in at a later point to talk about that, because that would be really interesting. I mean, were there any women who were resistant to using this snoopy garment?
I think the findings from the study will never be fully representative because it was about informed consent. So women that weren't interested in baby wearing and skin to skin wouldn't choose to take part. So there is that element of self-selection. And I suppose it's about opening up the conversation as much as possible to as many women as possible. And that was really featured in the recruitment strategy, that actually recruitment needed to be me on the ground having face-to-face conversations with women and enabling, conversations about skin to skin happening early in pregnancy, and looking at the garment and having a feel. And even if that wasn't for them, skin to skin might be for them. So, trying to open it up as wide as possible to women that had perhaps parented lots of babies before and never done it, or women that didn't think it was their kind of thing.
And so was the garment taken away every time after 6 weeks? Was that it?
Yes, absolutely. So they had 6 weeks to use it. And the 6 weeks essentially is how long a baby can fit there. After 6 weeks, feet poking out the bottom and the baby's well on its way over the mum's shoulder. So it's kind of practicality. It's about 6 weeks in which a baby is comfortably contained there, and that the woman is comfortable holding a baby there too.
Okay. And did you, I mean, I understand that the airway for a baby is a sort of weaker structure. How did you make sure that women understood how to put the baby in so the baby's airway would be maintained? Because I know that a lot of people will be concerned about that aspect.
Absolutely, and I think that's why small study numbers really helped. So when women were enrolled in the study, we did first of all a demonstration and supported by that pictorial information and about adopting the tree frog position, which is very easy to recognise looking at those flexed hips and arms outstretched and baby's face to the side. And actually it was really easy for women to sustain. There's two ways that you can put baby in the garment. You could put it on and essentially jiggle them down the front, or in my technical language, or if you're less confident, you could have the garment around your waist and position the baby and
then pull it on
the top. Absolutely.
All right, okay. No, that's very interesting. I mean, I can imagine some mums would, I mean, were you able to give them some advice about what to use after, when their baby had grown out of the snoopy, of the sort of gadgets or baby wear, mum wear that they could use?
Yeah, it's, I guess, less about kind of specific baby wear and more just about the principles of skin to skin. And women have kind of navigated this themselves, whether or not they had the garment. They might be having skin to skin in the bath every night, or might be having snuggles in their dressing gown, or different ways in which they would spend that close time with their baby. So there wasn't, a Snoopy part 2 as such, but women had developed their own strategies throughout those first 6 weeks of how it feels good for them to have their baby close and how their baby responds to being close. And for them, they're solving their own problems with, really simply with that kind of close proximity and responsiveness.
Yeah. And I actually was very interested in the communication aspects of that. And it's almost like by having the baby so close, it was kind of reminding the mum she needed to interact in a way. I don't know if that would be what the psychological aspect of that would be, but it's interesting to think of the sort of the gazing and the nurturing touch being increased, or noticing it. I mean, maybe that happens with all mums, but I wonder if you've got the baby in a crib or in somewhere else rather than really close to you, time might slip by very easily. So that was really interesting. Thank you so much, Roisin. I hope that we can book you when you've published that next bit, so that we can find out more about the Snoopy and the RCT, because of course that's the next bit, and then you've got the final qualitative bit, which will be sometime even along there. Is that right?
I'll get there. Yeah, slowly but surely.
Because what I should have said was big congratulations to Roisin, because she's just completed not just a PhD, but also any amendments that had to be made. So she's formally, properly now Dr. Roisin. Fantastic.
So
and well done to you.
That's really kind.
Fantastic.